Blessed to be a part of your day. Kevin Miller in the morning here at KIDO Talk Radio. Don't forget, Thursday we'll be at Terry's Cafe for the Unity Rally after the bare knuckle brawl that has been the Idaho Democratic and Republican primaries, which will be tomorrow. Our coverage begins at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Of course, our great friend Lars Larson with us. We'll talk to Lars. We'll get your calls, and we will roll. And why not start with our great friend Lars Larson joining us now from the Lars Larson Show, which you can catch weeknights 6 to 9 here at KIDO Talk Radio. Lars, good morning.
Good morning, Kevin. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Now, you're a national guy, but of course, you're always about the region. Recently, you had a chance to hold a gubernatorial debate. Who's going to run and who's going to be the next governor in Oregon? How did that go?
It went very well, although I have to say one of the three candidates blew himself up on the stage, metaphorically. And this shows why when people decide to run for office, I've never run for office. I never want to run for office. But having interviewed, I would guess at least hundreds, it might even be thousands of candidates over the years, I've seen all the ways not to do it. And I've learned some lessons from the side. I mean, again, I can look at it and say, no, that was the wrong way to do it. So one of the three candidates is a fellow named Sam Carpenter, who's a good, solid conservative, he says, on the issues, and who's running against a more moderate, Knute Buehler, who's an orthopedic surgeon, a doctor, who's probably got the best chance to beat the incumbent Democrat, as Oregon has had Democrat governors for more than a third of a century now. And it has driven the state into the ditch, financially and in a lot of other ways. The state's $50 billion in pension debt. So having said that, it's important to get new leadership for the state because the old leadership from the Democrat Party, all these policies, higher taxes, rapid growth of government, fiscal irresponsibility, a literal corruption, because the woman who's in the office now, Kate Brown, was the Secretary of State until the previous governor committed some ethical violations, dozens of them, along with his girlfriend, who he liked to call the First Lady, but she was not. And so, we need to replace that leadership. So a gentleman decides to run. He's probably the number, or he was until Friday, the number two position, number two runner in the GOP race, because there are about 7 or 8 Republican candidates, although a few of them are just also-rans. So Sam Carpenter's signature issue against Knute Buehler has been criticism of Buehler's votes, a few of them, in the legislature on gun bills. So Second Amendment's a big deal for him. And I say to him, there's an initiative petition that may or may not make the ballot, may or may not get voted in, that would lead to the confiscation of the majority of firearms in the state. It is such a tight ban that it affects pistols, it affects rifles. It doesn't affect all, but it affects a majority of semi-automatic rifles and pistols in the state and requires either surrender of your weapon or confiscation or destruction. And a limited number of people would be allowed to keep those weapons if they register them with the state, a state registry which doesn't exist today. It's a crazy infringement on civil rights. So a number of sheriffs in the state have already passed resolutions or made announcements saying if that law passes, it is clearly unconstitutional. The courts will decide that, but until they do, I'm not enforcing it. Now, it's the same approach to a different issue that some of the sanctuary folks have taken, with one important difference. In the case of sanctuary, when you have cities saying we will not help the federal government to enforce existing laws, they're not claiming the laws are unconstitutional, the laws on immigration. They're just saying we don't like them, so we're not going to enforce them. In this case, the sheriffs are saying this is an unconstitutional infringement. So I asked the question. It was very simple. If IP 43, that's the initiative petition, passes and you're governor, will you enforce it or refuse to enforce it, as some of the sheriffs have done? So I framed it. It's one of the major issues. It's something current that may be in front of the voters as soon as November. Two of the candidates, the more moderate, Knute Buehler, said, no, I'll not enforce it. And Captain Greg Wooldridge, the former 3 times commander of the Blue Angels, the Navy's aerobatic team, said he wouldn't enforce it. And if he had not entered the race so late, Captain Wooldridge would be a fantastic candidate. And I suspect that he will be a candidate for public office again. What does Sam Carpenter say? Having made guns and the Second Amendment one of his signature issues and one of the big cudgels he's been using to beat up Knute Buehler, and I didn't pick a favorite in the race, he then comes out and says, no, I'd enforce the law. I was standing there on the debate stage. It took all I could to keep my chin from dropping to the podium. And it was a stunning moment. And I was concerned enough about it that maybe he had phrased it badly. And I said, listen, I want to give you another chance. You say you would enforce this law that you think is unconstitutional. He said, yes, I would. And and then in the hour following the debate, I was taking some calls on First Amendment Friday about the debate, and he called back in and told my producers he wanted to get on and clarify his position. All he did was get on and clarify that that's exactly what he would do. The Oregon Firearms Federation, which is a group that lobbies the legislature very sensibly on gun legislation, but they are a staunch defender of the Second Amendment, they had rated Sam Carpenter an A. They dropped his rating to an F in that moment when he answered that question. They were watching the debate, and they said, you now get an F. And I got so many emails, so many Facebook posts from people saying, boy, am I glad that I waited for the debate. We didn't schedule it late on purpose. We would have liked to have scheduled it earlier. The ballots have been out for 3 weeks because tomorrow is the count, but Oregon, of course, has this goofy vote-by-mail system that is a terrible system, but it's what we've got, so we live with it. And so here are all these voters, some of whom had voted, and said, oh, my God, I voted for that guy. I had no idea. And it shows where I think when a candidate decides to run, Kevin, here's my advice. You say, I'm going to run. Whatever you're going to run for, school board, county commissioner, city council, state legislature, sit down and figure out the issues of the area you're going to represent, whether it's a legislative district, a city, a county, whatever. Figure out what have been the big issues in that county. Say pick the top 12 to 15 issues. Sit down with a couple of your campaign folks and go on the Internet and find out what are the biggest issues. Make a list of them. Figure out where everybody stands on those. Where does your opponent stand? Where do the other members of the county commission stand, or the legislature, whatever? Even if it's Congress, figure out where they stand, and then figure out where you stand. Because if you don't know where you stand on an issue, you're a fool to open your mouth and say you're going to run for office. It's a crazy thing to do. And that is the kind of thing that if you sat down and had dinner with your staff at 5 o'clock at night and said, I'm going to run for office, good. In the next 4 or 5 hours, you could run out the majority of the issues. Now, there'd always be fine-tuning during the campaign, but I'm willing to bet that there are a lot of people, and God bless them for being willing to run. It is certainly a tough task, but they run without having thought it through and said to themselves, where do I stand on this? And don't think about where you stand based on your friends' questions. Think about the toughest question you could be asked. Now, the question I asked wasn't all that inherently tough. It was, there may be a new law. And it got us into a discussion. I want to ask you, Kevin, you've read, I'm sure, the oath that the president takes, the oath that the governor of Idaho takes, the oath that state lawmakers take. Do you know what they promised to support and defend?
The Constitution.
Right. They do not say, I'm taking an oath to support and defend the laws of the state of Idaho or of the United States of America, and here's why. Some of the laws turn out to be unconstitutional. And if you think about it, even some Supreme Court decisions. Dred Scott is a famous Supreme Court decision that essentially said black people are not full human beings. Now, we can look back on that and think, well, that was stupid, but it was the law at the time. And there are a lot of other laws. I'm sure Idaho has some historic laws that we look at today and say, oh, my goodness, how could they have ever done that? There were laws in Alabama that said little brown kids couldn't go to school with little white kids.
Right.
And we look at that and say, well, that's stupid. Every one of those kids has full constitutional rights. And so if you were a governor and you were asked to enforce a brand new law, Kevin, I'm going to make you governor of Idaho for just the next 60 seconds. And you look at it and you say, I know that's a constitutional infringement on the civil liberties of my constituents, the people of Idaho. Would you enforce the law and say, yeah, 5, 6 years from now, a court may decide this. You know, it'll have to wend its way up through the lower Idaho courts to the federal courts, to the federal appeals courts, and then maybe get on the docket for the U.S. Supreme Court. I'll put it to you, Kevin. Would you enforce a law that you believe to be unconstitutional?
No.
Yeah. See, and the other two candidates had that nailed, and Sam Carpenter did not. And I I looked, and I had people saying, Lars, you believe in the law? I said, yeah, I do. Do you remember William Calley? There's an old name. Remember Lieutenant William Calley
Yes.
from the Vietnam days?
Yes.
Remember what he did?
Yes.
Yeah. He was given an order, and when my stepson was in the U.S. Marines, he knew that while ordinarily if your captain or your lieutenant says, hey, Marine, get over and take all those garbage cans and put them in the back of the pickup truck, you say, yes, sir, or aye, sir, right? But if he says, you go over there and see that mob over there, I want you to shoot every one of them dead. If that's an illegal order, it doesn't happen very often, but a service member is expected to refuse an illegal order, and you have to be able to know the difference. And William Calley, Lieutenant Calley, didn't. And the My Lai massacre goes down in history as an example of what happens when people just salute and follow orders. Because, Kevin, I was just following orders. Didn't work for the people at Auschwitz. Didn't work for the people at Belsen-Bergen. Didn't work for Lieutenant Calley. And I don't think it should work for governors. I think governors take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the state and of the United States of America. And in this case, this candidate didn't know that. And I want more people to run for office. We need great people to take those offices, but we need people who want it for the right reason. Not because you get an important title, not because you get your face in the paper or on television or on the internet. You need to take it because you really believe in our system of government and that you see your first responsibility as defending the constitutional rights of your people. And so in this case, Sam Carpenter blew up his campaign on Friday, and I don't think he was going to win the primary anyway, but he pretty well ensured that on Friday.
Our great friend Lars Larson joining us, Lars Larson Show, of course, 6 to 9, of course, anytime at larslarson.com, on Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere else. Lars, what do you make of the John McCain situation and a private conversation going public, and then you had people going crazy on the shows yesterday? Your thoughts? Well,
when you say a private conversation gone public, John McCain, I think, wanted information out there. And now, if you're talking about the comments made by one of Trump's staffers, Kevin, you and I both know that in newsrooms and in political offices and even in private homes, people say a lot of things that are very blunt and very direct that would not be politic to say out loud. Okay? And in the case of a White House staffer who says, look, this issue or John McCain's position on this may not be relevant in a time because he is, after all, dying. It is one of the political realities. And I think you'd apply the same rule if you were in a personal situation. If you said, hey, we're planning next year's vacation, and you say, well, do we take Grandma with us? And if everybody in the family knows that Grandma is getting close to her last days, you love Grandma. But do you say, oh, we got a plan to include Grandma, so that you can make a pretense that, she's still going to be around next year when everyone in the family knows she's not? Is it politic to say it out loud? Well, I guess you could say, well, we just won't say it out loud and then it won't be true. That's kind of foolish. In John McCain's case, John McCain has been an enemy of this president in the things that he has done. And in fact, I think he has not done well by the American public because he chose not to cast the deciding vote that would have had us get rid of most of Obamacare. We were rid of the worst parts of it in the individual mandate that went away with the tax reform. But he decided he flew back to Washington, D.C., he got tons of accolades. Look at this. This is a man who's very ill, who's decided to travel all the way to the nation's capital to cast the vote, and then he cast the vote no on all four ideas for getting rid of Obamacare. Did he serve America well then?
Indeed.
I think he's intent on doing as much damage to President Trump and a lot of other people. Look what he said about Governor Palin. Now, right. I will tell you, having interviewed Governor Palin all the way back to when she was mayor of Wasilla, Alaska, because I do have a national show. We knew her back then, and we had her on the show, and she has some good ideas. But for him to say, near to his deathbed, this is one of the worst decisions I've ever made in my life. What is the purpose of that, other than for a man who sees his last days coming to try to, do as much damage as he can on the way out the door?
Well, and then the idea of John McCain continuing to dish it out and any criticism of him. And again, I don't agree with the White House, remarks, but again, private conversations, as you've said, Lars, in the newsroom, at home, those things happen. But to vilify this young staffer for saying it and then on and on, where John McCain is antagonizing people, even as he approaches his last breath.
Yeah, and so if you have a private conversation, and I'll bet in the general manager's office at your radio station, private conversations have been had about. I mean, there's a very talented man who does a show that's on our flagship station. It's on around the country now, and I won't mention it because it may be on a competitor station. But these two guys are fantastic, and then one of them suffered a stroke and 2 heart attacks. And we waited for a long time for him to be able to come back. And when it finally became clear that he couldn't come back, he was replaced with somebody else. And he's come back to radio in a limited way, and he's a wonderful human being. But there are conversations you have to have about what are the realities of how much longer do we wait for him to come back? Is he going to be capable of coming back? Now, those are always delicate situations, but should we tell everyone, don't even say in private, don't speak plainly in private about matters that are delicate like that. Don't say them, because if it leaks out, then it's going to hurt everyone, even though everyone who heard that comment understood it wasn't mean-spirited, it was reality. It was reality. And so, I think that what we should consider, the message itself wasn't, I think, the worst thing. The worst thing was the fact that this president clearly has people still working for him who are willing to do as much damage as they possibly can to the president they work for. Now, Kevin, I think you're expected as an employee of KIDO to say, are you going to go out and damage the company publicly for no good reason? What would your boss say about that? If you said, I'm going to hear things in private conversations at the radio station, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to tell some people so that the radio station is embarrassed or even hurt financially, not by things that are, I mean, I guess if you work at the Boise Police Department, you find out one of your supervisors is taking money on the side, by all means, report it. It's a crime. But if you find out that something has happened which releasing the information is simply damaging to the department without correcting a problem like that, like a criminal problem, what would be the purpose of doing that other than, say, to have people lose faith in the Boise Police Department, over something that's if the chief of police there has an injured police officer, someone says, do you think he's going to be able to come back to duty? And the honest answer is no. I don't, based on what his doctors have said and everything else, he's not going to be able to return to duty. He may be making a brave front of it by saying, I'm coming back. Good. Let him try. But if the reality is he isn't, then it may be there's a captain or a lieutenant who says we need to replace that officer now because it's extremely unlikely that he's going to be able to come back. Should those private conversations be made public? To what purpose?
Right.
To humiliate the department, to have people lose faith in the Boise police for no reason other than somebody saying something that is true. John McCain is not going to be with us, we think, very much longer. And I won't ever wish that someone, passes more quick. Well, Osama bin Laden, I wished he passed more quickly. I wish Hitler had put the gun to his head a few years earlier. But other than that, I wish John McCain, the human being, well. Do I think has served his country in uniform? Absolutely. Do I think he's serving his country well today? No, I don't.
Lars, we're out of time, but we're going to catch you tonight at 6. And we always appreciate you making time for us and love your show, brother.
Hey, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Lars. Our great friend Lars Larson joining us. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. KIDO Talk Radio coming up. Our great friend David Leroy will join us. Citizen Dave, coming out of retirement, ready to roll. We'll talk about his campaign for Congress. But first, we quickly go to Liberty Linda, who's been very patient. Good morning, Liberty Linda.
Good morning, Kevin. Kevin, I just wanted to thank you for your wonderful radio show. It's marvelous listening every morning. You're like a Christmas present to us. And every morning, you know, we pull open the little red ribbon on our Christmas present, and you give us such a wonderful show. And so you're a Christmas present to us 5 mornings a week.
Well, hopefully I'm not a lump of coal.
No, definitely not. And somebody once said that I'm voting for Tommy Ahlquist because I'm a friend of his. I don't know if Tommy Ahlquist would know me if I were standing in front of him. I have met him once. I'm voting for him for, number one, inspiration, and number two, I've seen him at work, and I believe he will be good for Idaho. So
Does he pull it off tomorrow?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I think there are many, many people out there that knows he'd be a good man and honest and conservative, and I believe he and Steve Yates and Russ Fulcher will make a great team for Idaho.
The big three.
Pardon me?
The big three.
The big three. That's my big three. That's who I'm going for.
I see. Well, it'll be a very exciting day. He'll be joining us tomorrow at 7 if you'd like to call in.
Okay. Sounds wonderful. I'm really looking forward to this. This is exciting.
Well, we look forward to your coverage. You're our political advisor here.
Okay. Politically, that's what I say. Tommy Ahlquist, Steve Yates, and Russ Fulcher.
All right. Liberty Linda, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well. Our great friend, Liberty Linda. God bless. Traffic and weather together. Coming up next, our Kevin and the Contender Series continue. David Leroy, candidate for Congress, next on KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Maggie. KIDO Talk Radio. David Leroy joining us, our great friend and fellow Postcard Man follower, or on the Postcard Man mailing list. People don't know this. There's a gentleman that sends postcards to myself, Tom Munns, David Leroy, Mike Miniger, sometimes Tea Party Bob. And he's a very articulate young man. The only reason why we say this, it's not an inside thing, but if you get a postcard from this guy, it shows that he listens to the program. And you have breaking news from the Postcard Man.
I do, and I'll be able to read it here in a moment when it comes in from the car. But the Postcard Man sent me, yes, a postcard.
Right.
On which he said that he gave up.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that next break as we move along here. And this has been going on for 8 or 9 years here, and people always come up to me and say, "Look, you got a postcard from the Postcard Man," and we have this is.
Well, let me read the text.
Sure.
Dave, you are a statesman and a Republican's Republican. Your devotion to Lincoln is forever, and my attempt to persuade you otherwise is futile. Good luck on May 15th, and keep government small. John B. Gordon, the Postcard Man.
Wow. There we have it. He comes up with a lot of names, though. The Postcard Man does.
Last time I was on the show, I asked him to send me either an email address or a telephone number so I could dialogue with him about Lincoln, but it sounds as if I don't need to.
Well, we'll see about that. So the artist formerly known as Citizen Dave, back off the bench, back from your sabbatical, a day away from Decision Day. Your thoughts?
I'm excited about it. It appears that this race for 1st District Congress is a two-way race between myself and Russ Fulcher. The last polling that we had both of us at about 26, undecided at between 12 and 15. It's simply a turnout game. If my people come out, I'm the next congressman from the 1st District of Idaho, and I'm excited about the energy that we built. I'm pleased that 20 years out of office as Citizen Dave is a good selling point, because I've had to live under the laws that Congress has passed, and my kids, my grandkids, my clients, my business activities have all been impacted by non-Trump policies. And so my spiel to the 1st District voters has been, look, I support the president. If we put conservative legislation in front of him, he'll pass it, or he'll sign it after we pass it. And the opportunity to do that has been thrilling enough to me to come back off the bench and present my credentials again. It is indeed a two-way race, and I believe that the fact that I'm not going to be the congressman from the Club for Growth, the fact that I will bring considerable experience as somebody who's formerly represented all of the 1st District when I was Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General of Idaho, even Acting Governor of Idaho. I'm pleased at where we are, and I'm eager for tomorrow's results.
As a conservative, we opined about this for a lot, and you've seen this at our debate watch parties and our State of the Union parties. What was it like for you under 8 years of Obama? You speak about the laws, but that, as a student of history, as someone who has a great frame of reference, what were those 8 years like in American history?
Kevin, it was oppressive, and your reference to history is superb. Part of the frustration of the Obama years was that there was no respect whatsoever for the rule of law. The president ran roughshod over his limitations as a member of the executive branch, but corollarily, Congress didn't do their job in calling the president to account either. Those were frustrating, damaging, problematic years, and even the little things that a president can do to support law enforcement, to support good citizenship, became convoluted when Obama, in the instance, for example, of a police-involved shooting incident, would immediately assume that the police were wrong. There was great damage done to the fabric of our country during the Obama years, and that's why Trump is so refreshing. And frankly, I think that's one of the substantial reasons that he was elected. People, the good citizens who are paying attention in this nation, really do understand that we must revere the Constitution. We must strictly comply with the rule of law, and we must treat every citizen equally. That was obviously something that Hillary Clinton didn't receive in terms of the special benefits and the concessions that she got. It's something that people like Jim Comey have damaged in the continuum during these Trump years. But the chance to have Donald Trump to turn this back around is a spectacular opportunity.
David Leroy joining us, candidate for Congress here at KIDO Talk Radio. You've worked at the highest levels of both state and federal government. You've had a long run. So again, I want to pull on your experience here, and as your experience as an attorney as well. The DACA thing. The president says it's unconstitutional. Former President Obama, and yet he just kind of waves a magic wand and lets it happen. As not only, again, someone who's worked at the highest levels of government, but someone who practices law and has done both. What precedent did that set?
Well, the DACA resolution ultimately will come, I suppose, to us through the courts now as to a final ruling as to whether the DACA order and initiative of Obama had any legal basis, whether the DACA adjustments and cancellations that Trump have undertaken are going to be legal and legitimate. But once again, the issue of the DACA individuals is one that must be addressed by Congress because the underlying rules and statutes are those which affect that subset of our population. The Congress simply has to get back to doing its job. I understand that we're divided. I understand that we don't have sufficient margins sometimes in the House or the Senate to make clean rulings on controversial issues. But unfortunately, some of those problems are self-induced in the Senate with the rule about having 60 members of the Senate to consider any issue on the floor. And even the House of Representatives has rules that preclude a speaker from considering issues unless a majority of the majority party wish to go forward, called the Hastert rule. We have to get past these procedural rules that are precluding us in both the House and the Senate from considering the business of the nation. And if we can do that, then I think we'll be in good shape to use these last 2 years of Donald Trump. Interestingly enough, it seems to me that the so-called blue wave, the prediction that the Republicans in the House will be overwhelmed by new Democrat members, does not appear to be happening. And I've said that for weeks. I think the germane question for the voters in November is going to be that old Ronald Reagan question. Are you better off now than you were a year ago, 2 years ago, et cetera? And if Donald Trump's economic bump, if the refreshing new approach he's brought to international issues, if all of these regulations that have been canceled are indeed helping the average voter's pocketbook, as I believe they are, I think this will be a very red country, and we do have the opportunity to resolve issues like DACA in the next Congress.
Sure. And we go back to the balance of power, though. And, so the legislature is not a rubber stamp. I mean, Ada County prosecutor, attorney general. You've argued 3 cases before the United States Supreme Court. You know the law. You've practiced the law. Have we seen during the Obama years a dangerous precedent where we make it up as we go?
Absolutely. And again, when we do that, we breed disrespect not just at the highest levels of government where those things continue time after time, but we breed a disrespect and a disgust at the Citizen Dave level and everybody who's listening out there. It is a disincentive to participate in a government that doesn't deliver predictable results. We all had some sense of the Constitution from our tutelage in primary school, in junior high, in high school. We think that government is pure and clean under a very virtuous Constitution. And when the very leaders who are supposed to be enacting those processes and respecting that Constitution don't do so, up and down the chain, it's very problematic. This is a time to right this Constitution, to correct this country, and it is historic in that way. Just as Lincoln fought some historic battles, though we're not north against south or east against west, we are, in some sense, red against blue, and that's been very problematic for the country. It's time to build more unity, and that unity ought to start with our Constitution. And
we'll figure out how to do that with the folks in Congress. Can David Leroy get along with Nancy Pelosi and the crew? We'll talk about that next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. And David Leroy with us, Citizen Dave, formerly Citizen Dave. Kevin Miller in the morning here. Now, coming up on Tuesday, we're having our primary night coverage. We'll be at the Riverside. Are you going to be there?
You have just told me that you're going to begin at 6 o'clock. I will be the first guy on because I've got to hit an airplane at about 8:15 out of the Boise airport.
And that'll be at Terry's Cafe, and we look forward to that. And in addition to that, primary night, where are you going to be?
I will be down at the Riverside with the Republicans. The Ada County Republican Party still has a few seats to a banquet down there that they're throwing pre-election.
Yeah.
And I hope anybody who's interested will go down and acquire one of those tickets from the Ada County Republican website. I'll do a little drop in there, and then we have rooms down at the Riverside, and love to see any of our supporters that wander that way. Interestingly enough, in the 1st District Congress race, as well as the state races, none of the returns will begin coming in until 9 p.m.
Ooh.
So in multi-party races like our 7-way race for Congress, it could be a very late evening.
Well, we'll be there at 8, so if you get a chance, please stop by our booth. Be myself and a microphone. It'll be very exciting for all of us.
We shall. I like you and the microphone. You seem to do good work with it.
Hopefully I can keep doing that. Let's go to the phones. Tea Party Bob for David Leroy at KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Tea Party Bob.
Morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Morning, Bob. How you doing? Have you voted yet? Good. A couple times?
No, I wait until the last day. This way I can go down and see how many people and who's actually voting.
Good.
Yeah, I have to say I can't wait for this primary election to be over. It seems like some of the candidates are doing their best to allow any and all vitriol to be perpetrated on their opponents by the political PACs. So, Mr. Leroy, please explain to me why there has been so much criticism of the money that the Club for Growth has spent on Russ Fulcher's campaign, because I can only presume that a lot of this is jealousy by his competitors because they didn't get any of the money. After all, the Club for Growth is an anti-tax, pro-free market, conservative political action committee that wants tort reform, entitlement reform, freedom for parents to choose education, and repeal of Obamacare, and on and on.
Well,
so
Bob,
is this just sour grapes, or what?
I'd be pleased to answer your question, but one of those vitriolic words which you probably rail against is jealousy, and you used it in the predicate of your question. I heard the discussion that Christy Perry, another one of our opponents, had an hour ago on this station criticizing it, and I've made a brief reference to it. The problem is not the basic philosophy of the Club for Growth. The problem is it's illustrative of what has become of the national political process in local elections these days. To spend nearly $250,000 on campaign advertising for a single candidate in everybody's a conservative race tells you that Club for Growth, the Texas billionaires and others from around the country, are heavily invested in controlling this seat in the national congressional activity. And what that means to me, and if you look at the same website from which you got your Club for Growth components, you'll find that they intend to pressure every single representative that is a Club for Growth person into their point of view. Now, to the extent that the Idaho position is identical to the Club for Growth, then there's no touch and no foul. But whenever Idaho interests in the 1st District, whether it's a North Idaho mining situation or a South Idaho agriculture situation, get any distinction or difference between the Club for Growth preferred position and the Idaho position, then that congressman from the Club for Growth is bought and paid for literally by the Club for Growth. In my case, it's not jealousy at all. You heard me indicate that essentially Russ and I are equally tied, as best the polls indicate. Russ is an honorable man, a worthy opponent. I believe he'd say the same of me. We've been entirely collegial this entire race. But the fact is that these races have become merely pawns in the national game for who controls the Congress. And I intend to be controlled by the electorate of Idaho and be the 1st District congressman, not the congressman from the Club for Growth.
Well, if what you say is true, then why do we not say anything about the political PACs like the Prosperity Fund here in Idaho and how much money they throw into the elections? Because I never hear that.
Well, all of these groups have interests. For instance, I'm endorsed by the American Conservative Union, the oldest and most widely respected of the conservative groups, the group that puts on CPAC, at which Donald Trump spoke here 2 months ago. And CPAC does not give money. CPAC rarely gives endorsements in races like this, and almost never in primaries. And the reason they endorsed me is because I sat down with Matt Schlapp. My wife Nancy and I did about an hour with him and his group. They thoroughly explored my philosophies. They thoroughly explored my potential to make a very significant contribution as an unusual candidate with a very deep background at a critical time in this nation's history. So there are groups that give endorsements like the American Conservative Union, which I'm pleased to receive, that have absolutely no strings. And unfortunately, the same strings that all of us decry about the federal government when it sends dollars back to this state for federal programs also are entanglements in the political process, especially when they amount to $250,000 in a single seat. It's a fact of life, Bob.
Tea Party Bob, thank you for the call. Traffic and weather together. And quickly to Hank for David Leroy, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Hank.
Okay. Mr. Leroy, are you going to vote for the establishment candidate, Kevin McCarthy, or would you vote for somebody for Speaker from the Freedom Caucus? And my second question is a tribute one. Before the days of the Australian secret ballot, when party organizations gave out tickets to the election booth, what did Lincoln do with his ticket before he cast it in the ballot box in 1860?
I love your trivia questions. I've not made any determination about Speaker. I've said that I won't automatically join any caucus. I don't intend to join the Freedom Caucus where you're bound by the votes of 40 other people that vote a certain way. Instead, I said I will form the Idaho Caucus, namely a close and congenial relationship with the other members of the delegation. And I also am excited about the possibility of trying to build a small state caucus, reaching out to those states with 3 or 4 members of Congress, 3 million in population or less, and trying to, in those states where government actually works, build a new group in Congress that I call the Idaho Caucus. As to Lincoln's ballot, he wouldn't do anything. He wouldn't mark it. He'd simply put it in the correct box because all of the ballots in Lincoln's era were pre-printed with all of the candidacies related to that particular party's preference.
What he did was he tore off the top part, which was his own name. He didn't vote for himself. He tore the top part off and put the rest of the ticket in the ballot box. According to Howard Holzer, President-elect Lincoln, that's where I got that from.
No, I think that's probably something that Lincoln uniquely did simply because he was a man of such strong ethics. But as to the ballots themselves, they were put in as pre-printed. Good point.
All right, Hank, thank you for the call. 20 seconds left. Citizen Dave.
Listen, I'm excited about the opportunity to have this election resolved. I'm very pleased to have been a candidate coming off the bench. I loved your phrase, the artist formerly known as Citizen Dave. When I'm the next 1st District Congressman, I'll still be Citizen Dave.
Thank you, sir. Fox News next. Good day. God bless. Keep the faith.